we have with us Dr. Bhumika Sharma, and I welcome you, ma'am,
Good
to this.
afternoon. Thank
Good afternoon.
you.
Dr. Bhumika Sharma is an assistant professor in the Department of English, Central University of Rajasthan, India, a double postgraduate with Masters in English and Economics from University of Rajasthan. She holds a doctorate in English. Her research interests include gender studies, post-colonial literature, and African American writings. She has authored the books the African American Journey to Power, Doom, Wright, Ellison, Baldwin, published by Cambridge Scholars Publishing, London, and co-authored two books titled The Sense of Being, an exploration of immaterialism of the matter and the logic, consciousness, understanding the revolution of sense. She has also co-edited a book discussing minority in text and co-text. Besides books, she has around 35 publications and research articles for books for in various books and anthologies. And beside all this, she has also delivered various talks and national and international conferences and seminars. We are really delighted to have you with us, ma'am. And let's not waste time further. And we would just like to listen to your views regarding this. We welcome
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Dr. Shubhra. In fact, I am grateful to the organizers to give me this wonderful opportunity to share my view on this platform. President Dr. Rejin and of course Dr. Morve Roshan and Dr. Mehrunisa Pathan and all other members of this organizing committee. It was really wonderful. I attended your earlier conference also on an indigenous study, and that was again a very wonderful experience for me. And that, motivated me to actively participate again, on this platform. So that's, I'm really thankful to you for that. Well, I would like to share my slides. So let me connect that. I hope that there is no internet glitches. Is it visible, Dr. Shubhra?
No, ma'am, not yet.
Okay. Because in my laptop, it is showing that.
Yes, now it's visible, ma'am.
Okay, is it visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Fine. As you can see that the subject of my talk is the language of feminine across cultures. And it has been an area which I have started exploring, I mean, uh, almost a year back, and I have found very interesting things there. And with that, I thought that I should develop as a paper and I should, talk about that. But before, coming to this major issue of this language of the feminine and how do we see its implication in the literature, I would like to begin my presentation with a very fundamental question. This topic and this subject has been talked about by different speakers, and they have referred to different terms which we use in the gender discourse, like female, feminine, and feminist. So I would like to know, like, do we have the real understanding of these three terms, which are basically the key terms used in the gender discourse, or sometimes they appear like, more or less same, which are interchanged at times. So perhaps we need to start with the understanding of these terms first, and then maybe we can move ahead to discuss that what do we understand or what do we mean by the language of feminine. So female is seen as a biological identity, whereas feminine is seen as a socio-cultural construction. As one of the speaker pointed out, and in fact everybody knows that famous quote by Simone de Beauvoir, who says that one is not born but rather becomes a woman. So definitely we all somewhere come to this understanding that gender is a socio-cultural construction. But there are so many problematics involved into this construction that the debate goes on. It does not come to an end. And feminist is basically a political positioning that comes here. we find that there's a group of the scholar. In fact, I would include man also, because there are many men who are feminists. It's not just the domain of the women that who are speaking for the equality or the rights of women. The male counterpart is equally participating into, let's say, talking about the rights of the women. And I think this conference itself is a very good example of that, where I can see so many male presenters who are very genuinely talking about various issues which are so relevant in terms of gender discourse. So this way, perhaps I can call feminism as a kind of political positioning. But do you think that the feminism remains confined or limited to just one single aspect? Because I don't find so. I find that this feminism includes both female and feminine and the connotations which are associated with these two terms, and then turn this feminism into a very broad concept, and it presents a very distinct worldview, which I think may differ from the male point of view, from the man's worldview, and that makes a feminist discourse so important. So although we talked sometimes about post-feminism and the death of feminism, but I don't think that the feminism has ended. It is still there. It may come into new form, but it remains there as a part of the discourse, because feminism is the counter discourse that challenges certain patriarchal notions of the mainstream discourse. So there have been, many scholars also who have tried to differentiate between these terms, like feminist, female, feminine. That is an essay which was published by Toril Moy. And in that essay, Toril Moy tries to define that what does she understand by feminine. So she says that feminism is associated with the basic female nature, and so it comprises the whole range of attributes which are categorized as womanly, like sweetness, modesty, subservience, humility. There are all characteristics that are generally associated with the feminine, and the feminine is marked with these behavioral patterns and these qualities or these attributes which are reflected into the personality. So we have this kind of discourse where these terms are defined and redefined, and then we try to see their interrelationship. So while talking about these three terms, Toril Moy refers to both seen and unseen implications of developing this feminine. Because when we say feminine and we actually relate to certain attributes, it appears quite promising. There may be many paybacks if we use feminine as a strong tool to produce the counter discourse, which may challenge the phallocentric discourse. But at the same time, it appears dicey also. It appears tricky also, because it may happen that we perhaps go back to the patriarchal binary position. Again, we are resorting to the same terminology which is used by the patriarchy by dividing the gender into masculine and feminine. So this way, I would say that perhaps it's a venture which involves its own paybacks as well as its own dangers. So we need to navigate this domain very carefully. And the same thing has been pointed out by Toril Moy also. But she is very sure of one thing, that feminine is associated with the otherness. When we talk about the phallocentric discourse, we find that in this contrast of the self and other, feminine is relegated to the position of the other. It is marginalized. And that's why it has not been explored to its utmost level. So that's why there is an unexplored potential which lies in this otherness of the feminine, which perhaps we can explore, which we can use as a strong tool to reverse certain problematic things, certain problematic conception which lead to the inequality and injustice. There are many women writers who have used this feminine as a new source of the poetics in their writing. They have created oppositional aesthetics in their novels, in their poems, by using both poetics and politics of the other. So that's why I think that this feminine has a very huge potential to be explored more in the feminist discourse. As I said that, although we can explore, but there is, has potential as well as risk. So it actually leaves with a question, then what is expected from the feminist scholar? What should they do? And I think, it becomes a kind of dilemma for them. To quote Toril Moy, who says that, it's easy to define feminism because feminism is a political position. It is convenient to understand femaleness because it is related to the matter of biology. But when we deal with the feminine as a cultural construct, it appears or it becomes slightly vague, because it seems like though we are talking about a container which can, anything can be poured into that, and it does not read like a proper definition. So this dilemma which lies with the feminists is that whether they should try to fix the meaning of the feminine while using it as a strong tool, or they should try to develop another set of feminine virtues which are not prescribed by the patriarchy. Maybe they can add certain more values which would bring out this nature of the feminine more strongly and very differently. So that way, this feminine term, the connotations which are associated with the feminine become very potential, full of energy, full of force, that perhaps can be used by the feminist discourse. And as I'm talking about feminine, it automatically opens the domain, or you can say the potential of the language of the feminine. If there is feminine, then perhaps the next question is, then perhaps we can think of having a language of the feminine also. And that let us enter into the linguistic domain. Linguistic domain has the language as the site, because we actually live in the language. We may observe the reality around. We are capable to understand the cognitive categorization that exists, outside in the world. But ultimately, we converse in language, and that's why language is very important to be controlled. So I'm not, posing anything as such that language is to be controlled by men or by women. But the thing is, language becomes the part of the identity. It becomes a channel through which the identities are constructed. It becomes the site where we live, we experience, and we share our experiences with others. And that's why the feminist intervention into the linguistic domain is very important. So before I explain this language of feminine, I would like to bring your attention to this idea of the gendered language. If we talk about language of feminine, perhaps we need to again begin with the fundamental question: is the language which we speak is gendered? I think there was one speaker, Dr. Sada. She referred to Robin Lakoff work. Robin Lakoff is a very famous linguist who has tried to bring out the various, characteristics of the womanly speech. So she differentiates manly speech from the womanly speech and talks about the differences in the speech pattern that exist between man and women's speech. So if it is so, which is actually proved by the data collected by the linguist, which actually proved it as a reality, and it does not remain theory anymore, because we have the statistical proof to see the difference between the man's speech and women's speech, then definitely we will have to agree with this idea that yes, to certain extent, the language we speak become gendered, maybe consciously, unconsciously, but it becomes so. Maybe because of the socialization which we undergo, but yes, there are traces which reflect that the language which we become gendered. So if the language is gendered, or there is this reality of gendered language, then we have another question. In fact, the whole set of questions: do man and women use different vocabulary and syntactic structures? Do they have different speech patterns and semantic intentions? Does the gendered use of language produce meaning from a gendered perspective? So this discussion about gendered language leads to the gendered discourse. I hope I am audible. Am I audible to everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, fine. So this way, we have this idea of the gender discourse, and that lead us to again reinvestigate the mainstream discourse, which is always accused by the feminists to have binary opposition. So I would like to investigate into this whole idea of the binary opposition that has led to so much controversy, so much debate, so much discussion, because I find this whole discourse is founded on the difference. If we try to understand this logocentric discourse, which is basically the mainstream discourse, we see that patriarchy construct the binary opposition first. Let's say in terms of gender, masculine and feminine. But it does not end here. If it is just about the binary opposition, then perhaps there is a possibility of connection between the two. But it does not end here, and we find that these binary oppositions are placed into hierarchical pattern. And so there is a further labeling attached with that, like masculine labeled as superior and feminine labeled as inferior. And that's why we feel the need of the resistance, because then it becomes problematic. So feminist resistance has led to develop a parallel discourse, which is counter discourse. And that has been very important in the development of humankind. Otherwise, you can imagine what would be the shape of the humankind. where humankind was, addressed as mankind, not as humankind. It was mankind only. So it is actually the power of the feminist discourse that has led to have the parallel discussion on the linguistic side that make, the women voice heard. And I think this whole conference on the gender also is emblematic of it. It is illustrative of the same endeavor. So this way the feminist discourse continues, and we have, the opportunity to understand the gendered language and the gendered discourse that has led to so much discussion about it. So this idea of the gendered language need to be understood in terms of functioning. How does it operate? And that I can explain with the help of various examples. Like we have different address terms which are used for different genders. Mr. and Sir for man, Mrs., Miss and Madam for women. So we have more terms, greater number of terms for the women to indicate their social status. Similarly, we have underlying constructed social roles, which automatically get reflected in the language use, consciously, unconsciously, because of the culturally constructed connotation that come into that. But this is a fact that the social roles get reflected into the language use. Very simple language use, which perhaps we don't pay even much attention to. Like we have the terms father and mother. They are basically kinship term. They can be called like, let's say, gender neutral term, maybe in the beginning when it was, conceived. But we have an understanding of father and mother. And the moment we use these kinship terms, they do not remain just the kinship term, and they lead to the social role. The socially assigned role to a man and the woman become visible in these two terms when we use them in our day-to-day conversation, when we refer to the father and mother. Another example is a very, very simple word, very gender neutral word, farmer. So farmer is a gender neutral word, but you can see that this use of the farmer, spontaneously evoke that image of a man carrying the plow. There are women who have been working on the field, but their image does not become so live and instant in comparison to the man. That so the farmer, although it's a gender neutral term, but it becomes uh, loaded with the masculine connotation. Now, beside that, there are certain other examples which tell that there are words like policeman and fireman, which are basically full of masculine connotation, but they are used as a generic terms. Now there has been change, like we are using, police officer in place of policeman, firefighters in place of fireman. So this change is happening, but it is happening because we have become attentive to this gendered language. We have become attentive to the implications of this gendered language. We have understood the functioning of the gendered language. So that way, perhaps this understanding of the gendered language is very important. Another example which you can see is the deliberate cultural invention of the spatial terms for gender, like career woman and working mother, but not the career man or working father. Now, what are the implications of these kind of cultural invention or the cultural construction? First of all, it operates the default mechanism of normalcy code. We have career women, but not career man, because it is natural for the man to have career. But when we talk about career women, it shows either it is abnormal, maybe perhaps at the beginning, or today, maybe it is extraordinary strength of the women that she is able to handle the domestic work also and the professional world too. So that way, the career woman becomes the symbol of the feminine power, the power of the female, the feminist position altogether. So that way, we have these deliberate cultural inventions which have its own positive and negative aspect. So definitely, I would like to see the career woman as a strong pillar of the feminist discourse, because it has enabled the women to have, the possession over the economic resources, which are equally important for the growth and for the identity formation for any individual, for any human being. But you can see that how the site of the language continuously being worked out, being redefined, being changed as per the change in the culture, in the cultural practices. So this way we can see that how the gendered language functions, and it reflects the social change, and then at the same time also put an impact on the society. And that way, we have this realization of the women power. Now, this is not the phenomena which is confined to one one culture. It is visible across the culture. I can give you the example of other cultures where we can see the use of gendered words and structures in the language. For example, in Portuguese, man says obrigado to say thank you, and women say obrigada to say thank you. It's a conventional way, perhaps, to do that thing, but that shows that these gender words are there present in the culture. Similarly, in Japanese, when they are referring to I, it refers to, the man refers to oneself as boku, and the woman refers to herself as watashi. So this way, the presence of gendered words in the structure is not confined to the English only. Why I'm telling this? Because I'm giving example mostly from the English language, but that is perhaps visible across cultures in different form, maybe in terms of the gender terms, or maybe in terms of the gender talk which we see. So let's, after understanding this whole conception of the gendered language which lead to the gendered discourse, we are left with certain questions to investigate. Now, my postulation is, do these linguistic differences percolate in literary writings? If yes, then how do they operate to generate the gendered perceptions? Do the works produced by women writers play upon the gendered language to produce discourse by using the language of the feminine? So there are a number of the theoretical tools and the frames available which help us to investigate this percolation of the linguistic difference or the gendered terms or the gendered language into literature, and how these women writers very powerfully use this linguistic tool to challenge the problematic constructions of the phagocentric discourse. So we can take help of the Robin Lakoff theory, Jennifer Coates' theory in the linguistic domain, which talks about the womanly speech, or the difference in the socialization that lead to the gender talk and gender terms. Similarly, we can also use Foucault and Derrida's post-structuralist approach that talks about this phagocentric discourse and how it comes into being, how it marginalizes the women. And then we can also see like Alan Sixtu's écriture feminine. And I think in this regard, this idea of the écriture feminine, which was given by Alan Sixtu, becomes very significant. Because what Sixtu said, years back, that women need to write. Écriture feminine is basically her persuasion for the women to write in their own language. So when she was referring to her own language, what did she indicate by that? What did she mean by that? Perhaps she was referring to that language of the feminine, which could be developed as an alternative language, which perhaps the women writer can use as a medium of expression. And that is important because I told you that the women writers see the new source of poetics and politics which lie there in the language of the feminine. Because this language of the feminine is somewhere exploring those dimensions of the otherness which are left behind, which are kept aside by the patriarchy while constructing this masculine discourse as the mainstream discourse. So this way, these questions lead us to, of course, this whole idea of the language of feminine. And in this regard, I would refer to Jane Cormack's work, her book, The Language of the Feminine, which actually postulates this concept and very interestingly explain it, that what perhaps we can categorize as the language of the feminine, what attributes we can identify as the characteristics of the language of the feminine. So she refers to multifaceted dimensions of the language of the feminine. She says that the language of the feminine draws upon the creative, intuitive, and sensual self of being a woman. So to quote her, perhaps I would like to use that phrase which she has used in that book. She says that the language of the feminine is the realizing that deep wisdom, power, softness, see the contradiction, the antithetical elements which are present there in each personality. So power and softness, both which lie there in being women. The love and compassion which is embedded in being a woman. So if the woman or a women writer can develop that language of the feminine and can use it to challenge the problematic construction, perhaps it would prove very beneficial for the society, because it would lead the society into the creative direction, into the constructive direction, instead of perhaps leading to some kind of bias or some kind of irrational debate, and that perhaps opens this field of exploration further. Jane Cormack also refers to the other qualities which are present there in the language of feminine, and so she advocates a switch to an expression which is for the wholeness of the feminine nature. So the women need not to be feel like ashamed of their body. They need not to feel as though they are irrational, as because they are tagged sometimes as very emotional and irrational by the patriarchy. So they need not to think about these already imposed stereotypical figures which have somewhere fixed them into a frame. Now they need to liberate themselves from that frame, and to come out that frame is of course challenging, but women are doing so. And even there are men also who participate into the feminist discourse and talk about the equality of the women. So that way there is the possibility of the women to break that frame and then speak in their own language, which does not have any kind of imposition and the prejudices that make them, let's say, uncertain in their expression, or which make them weak in their expression. No, women are not meek, not neither meek nor weak. So that way women has a lot of potential. So this way this language of the feminine becomes a very strategic move to be used by the feminist writers and the scholar. Because what the women writers do by using the language of the feminine, they actually use, or I should say appropriate, a patriarchal tool back to challenge the gendered perspective and gendered constructions which are built by the patriarchy. So that way it proves very strategic in the regard of talking about the women empowerment. It is also seen as an oppositional positioning, because there is a strong resistance from the women's side. When she speaks in her language, she does not believe in the earlier ideas which are postulated and established as universal truth by the man, because she does not believe in that excessive application of the so-called patriarchal reasoning, because now the reasoning appears problematic to her. So she would like to question this reasoning, because on the basis of that reasoning, this patriarchy has given the models of the development and civilization. But these models have failed to a certain extent. You cannot say that this society is perfect. It means the models which have implemented here, they have some lacuna. And so we need to listen to the other also, the other party, the other perspective, the other worldview, which perhaps could contribute to develop a new society which would be perhaps more balancing in its approach. So that way, speaking in the language of the feminine is basically an oppositional positioning which does not believe in the patriarchal notion, especially the problematic patriarchal notions anymore. So that perhaps tells you the power of the language of the feminine. As I said, that women writers have shown this, and by doing so they have deconstructed this phagocentric discourse. So how the women writers do it, that perhaps I can explain in brief. First, women writers address the epistemological binaries which are named rational and emotional in the mainstream discourse, which actually further lead to the construction, the corresponding construction to the masculine and the feminine. So women writer use this feministic deconstructive play with the language, or I should say at the site of the language, and then they disrupt the rhythm of this rationality. Whatever has been established by the masculine discourse by now as rational, now the women question that rationality itself. See, if it has been rational, so what kind of society we have come out at the last? This is a very major question. So women, when speak from the different position in her own language, then she introduces an intuitive resilience of the common sense. She poses common sense against this rationality which has been so much emphasized in the phagocentric discourse. So she says that before thinking about rationality, let's have the common sense. Are we really doing justice with everybody, with all categories? Are we doing justice with the nature? The relationship which is established between man and nature, again man, actually it should be human. So human and nature, what kind of relationship which we have established by now, is it all fine? If it is not, then perhaps we need to think from the different perspective, which has not been the perspective by now. So this way, these women writers redefine enlightenment. They not only investigate it, but they redefine it by questioning it. What explains enlightenment better? The heightened intellect of the narcissist self, which is reflected in the masculine subject who lies at the center of the phagocentric discourse, or it is more reflected or better reflected in the sympathetic softness of the interactive approach, which is generally associated with the feminine. Feminine are supposed to be more sympathetic, more caring, have more love and affection. So this is not I am postulating here. This is the discourse which has said that, see, women have these attributes. They are more emotional. They are more caring. So is it so? Then do you think that these virtues and the qualities are negative qualities? Because I do not see any negativity in that. So this way, these women writers deconstruct the phalgocentric discourse by deconstructing these binary oppositions like rational versus emotional and masculine versus feminine. And this deconstruction of the binaries by them lead to investigate the interrelationship of all other binaries, including human nature, man, woman, black, white, high, low, superior, inferior. And then they look for an alternative language where we can, if cannot do away with the binaries, at least we can have an interface between these two binaries. We can make it a dialogue instead of just having a monologue that exists in the compartmentalized form in two different parts. So let's have a very healthy dialogue, and that perhaps may lead to the better society. So this way, the women writers deconstruct the phallocentric discourse, and this feminist deconstruction has its own implication, because women writers do away with the privileged masculine in the construction of meaning. These theories find out the scope which is available for the language of the feminine. They also emphasize the need of the balanced opposition in place of the hierarchical setup. The opposition is to be replaced by the opposition. So opposition, that is basically, the contradiction, that is to be replaced by a position, that is putting them side by side, putting them together, close together, so that the dialogue becomes possible. And that lead to the actualization of the aperture of feminine, where the women writers can use the language of the feminine, can speak using different worldview, can talk in different language where they can question the problematic constructions of the masculine or phalgocentric discourse. So this way, a creature feminine or women writing becomes an articulation of women's experience in literature, and it also becomes an acknowledgement to the distinct mode of thought and expression used by the women authors. Because somewhere we come to this understanding that the women writers, when they talk about women experiences, they present a very different worldview, which is not same as has been postulated by the writers. Especially male writers or patriarchal writers, or those writers who have this patriarchal mindset. Now, how this feminist deconstruction at the linguistic site happens, especially when we talk in terms of the literature and literary history and the literary works, I would like to explain it with the help of an illustration. We all know that these feminists try to rewrite history. It is important because they need to trace the presence of their foremothers. And there are a number of the works which have come up in this regard, like June Sauchel's Her Story, A Women's View of American History, which was published in 1974, was an attempt by this writer to give the alternative view of the history, to rewrite the history, where women can be included. Similarly, Alan Showalter's work, A Literature of Their Own, From Charlotte Bronte to Doris Lessing, which was published in 1977, again is a feminist attempt to rewrite history. Sandra M. Gilbert's and Susan Goober's Shakespeare's Sister, Feminist Essays on Women's Poet, published in 1981. It was again the attempt on the part of the writer to rewrite history. Suzy Tharu and K. Lalita, who wrote Women Writing in India 600 BC to the Present, Volume 1 and 2, published in 1991 and 1993. So these are just a few examples. You can go for other cultural discourses, other literary traditions, and you will definitely witness a number of examples, because my time is also limited, and I'm actually trying to keep it brief. So that's why I'm not including all, and it's not possible for me to include all those works. But these 3-4 works, if I take as an example, I would like to draw your attention to that feminist deconstructive play with the language, where you find that how they use feminine connotation in place of masculine connotation to again deconstruct that phalgocentric discourse. So forefathers are replaced by foremothers. His story is turned into her story. Why? Because his story, that is history, has failed to speak on behalf of women. That's why there is need of her story. That is a history which is written by the women, in which the women are included. Shakespeare's sister, here Shakespeare has a genitive case. Genitive case means it has the possessive marker S. So Shakespeare's sister. So the author does not refer to the exact name which can identify like whom she is talking about. Instead of that, she is putting all those women writers together into this category who can be known as Shakespeare's sister. So this genitive case of possessive S, the marker of this possession, shows that how the literary creativity of these women writers, that is those who were contemporary of to Shakespeare, is possessed by the Shakespeare. That colossal figure of Shakespeare perhaps led to, you know, press those women writers down to the oblivion, and that's why these writers feel the need to reinvestigate the literary history to find out that who were those women writers who were not included into the literary history. If you take this example, women writing, which is very popular term, very generic use, which we see in our discourse, women actually was a noun. In effect, it's a noun. But here we use women as adjective to qualify the another noun, that is writing. Writing, actually write is a verb. So verb is converted into this participle, that gerund, of course, writing, and then women has been used as an adjective to create a separate niche for the women to speak on their own behalf. So this way you can see that how they use this feministic deconstruction to somewhere bring out the problematics, because here all these works are bringing out the problematic involved into the historiographical configuration, which have somewhere determined the literary history to be known, to be understood by all of us, and that perhaps miss out many important women writers, which are definitely included by great women scholars. And now we have, one of the speaker was referring to Chandravati, that is a Bengali writer who was contemporary to Shakespeare. So you can imagine that how these feminist endeavors have led to the inclusion of the women writers and carving their niche in the literature or in the literary domain. So this way, feminist deconstructive play with the at the site of the language becomes very important, and this is exhibited at different levels. It is exhibited at the level of gender terms also, and at the level of gender talk also. So I would cite an example that how this feminist deconstructive play is visible in terms of the terms or the words. Like, as I said, that this history is converted into her story. So what are the implications of that? The author reconstruct the language of discourse by translating masculine connotation into the feminine one. Then she invents the discursive lexicon of the feminine. This is actually developing a new lexicon, new vocabulary, which should be the part of the discourse, which should reflect that feminine connotation. And why so? Because masculine language fails to speak for them. She also builds that ingenious context to center stage the new semantics, because it is not just at the level of the word or the term or the terminology, but there lies the semantic, the whole production of the meaning. So his story, that is history, when put against the her story, that automatically reflect that what this contrast mean to us, to us as a society, to man separately, to women separately, and to man and women together. So that way, this feminist deconstructive play keeps on working at at different levels, and its subtleties are really interesting to understand. Now, this history turned into her story does not end here. We have another writer, Showalter. She titles her work Histories, Historical Epidemics and Modern Culture. Now, in this title of the work, you can see the opposition of hysteria and histories. Now, what actually led Showalter to give this title to her work? Is she trying to, again, deconstruct something at the linguistic side? Is she trying to point out again some kind of the problematic which remain involved in this phalgocentric discourse, which led to the stereotypical imagery, which led to the prejudiced understanding of certain things? So that perhaps we need to investigate. And when we read this book, we find that, yes, this is deconstruction. Why? Because here the author argues against hysteria. Hysteria, a term which was generally postulated, especially in the 19th century Western discourse, it was identified as a medical condition with the women only, of the women only. So hysteria is being associated with the feminine, with the women. And so this histories, just placing along with the hysteria, refers to the stories which are formulated by the phallocentric discourse. So is it history, or these are the stories which are fabricated by the phallocentric discourse or in the phallocentric discourse to give you the wrongful connotations, give you the wrongful understanding of the thing? So here the author reversed that hypothetical masculine assumption by showing that hysteria is not masculine and feminine. You can see the omnipresence of hysteria across culture. She, in fact, redefines the semantic of this word hysteria, because hysteria is a psychological and physical effect of unhappiness which can be experienced by anyone, irrespective of gender, and it is present across the cultures. It is not feminine. Is it a strategy, or was it a strategy of the phallocentric discourse to associate hysteria with feminine to prove that the women are irrational? So there, you are left with a very big question mark. Here you come across with a problematic which perhaps we did not pay attention to, but that need to be addressed. So this kind of linguistic deconstruction by the women writers, by the feminist scholars, is very important, very significant, because that tells you that how the culturally constructed meaning or the cultural connotation partake, they participate into creating these binaries at the linguistic level, and that evoke that imagery of truth versus falsehood, reality versus fancy, fact versus speculation, and history versus fiction. So what is fiction and what is real history is need to be interrogated, and that is what the women writers do by this feministic deconstructive play at the linguistic side, because they bring out this problematics of this phallocentric discourse. Now here I would like to give you very contemporary example, because we all are familiar with June Soshin and Virginia Woolf, and for that matter Showalter. I chanced upon to read one poem by Nikita Gill. She's a very contemporary poet, and Nikita Gill, in her poem An Ode to Fearless Women, writes, "Defined by no man, you are your own story, blazing through the world, turning history into her story. And when they dare to tell you about all the things you cannot be, you smile and tell them, I am both war and woman, and you cannot stop me." Now see the beautiful deconstruction at the linguistic side, which is done by this contemporary poet Nikita Gill. Now, in the very opening, like defined by no man, here the poet has first taken that subjective agency. And how she has done it, she has constructed this phrase in passive voice. This is a passive construction, defined by no man. So first she uses passive construction instead of the active construction. And then she uses a negative form of the noun phrase no man. She's not using man, not defined by man. She does not say like this. She says defined by no man. So no man, that is a negative form of the noun phrase. So by using these two strategies, she assumes the subjective agency for the woman first, because now she is speaking for herself. The woman is speaking on her behalf. And why so? Because she is creating her story, that is history of women. So first she assumes this agency, and then she creates her own history or her own story. And then see in the next few lines a very strategic figurative deployment of the consonants. Consonants is repetition of the ver sound here that you can see in the war and women. Ver is basically bilabial phoneme, and she uses this sound and bring women and war, because they have very different meaning. Women and war, these are two different meaning, two different words. War is in fact associated with the man or the masculinity, but here she has brought that war in close connection to the women, and they become almost synonym to each other, that women and war. So opposition is replaced by opposition, and by doing so the writer displaces the conventional referential meaning which lie in the war, because this war does not remain a representative of or of any masculinity, but it becomes a very strategic move on the part of the women. So here she invests the associative meaning, going beyond the referential meaning and then bringing the associative meaning to generate implied meaning in the word. So war turns into a creative effort. War does not remain destructive anymore here, because the woman is not intended to destroy anyone. She does not intend to put the things upside down. She does not want to create any chaos. She is actually taking a very creative initiative so that this whole discourse can be again put back on the right track. So here the war becomes a creative effort that resists the wrongful power imposition. So these kind of the deconstructive play at the linguistic side become very important to understand what are the potentials there lie in the women writing, and then their use of the language of the feminine, where you have this first step where one masculine pronoun his is replaced by the feminine pronoun her, but then how it leads to the further and further deconstruction and more new meanings produced by this deconstruction, and we are left with a completely new semantic that is giving you a new worldview, a new view of looking at the things, a new perspective to understand the things. So this way the deconstruction continues. Now I would like to, draw your attention to this same feminist deconstructive play at the level of the gendered talk also. It's not just at the level of gendered word, which I have cited as examples. Here I would refer to another work, that is Jennifer Coates' work, Women, Man and Language, a social linguistic account of gender difference in language. I think Dr. Sada was also referring to the lack of theory, where these linguists talk about the gendered socialization that led to the gendered language, because men socialize in larger groups through competitive activities in hierarchical relationship, as pointed out by Coates in her study, and women are seen as socializing in the smaller groups through cooperative activities in reciprocal relationship. So this type of gender socialization lead to the gender differentiated language, because that make men and women both think in specific manner, and they not only think in their specific manner, they also talk in their respective masculine and feminine language. Man would be talking for having the floor in more assertive way, to have longer turns so that they can get the things fulfilled, whereas women are seen as using more back channels like ha, they say like that. So they give the back channels because they want more participation in comparison to man, as the studies point out. And then they also prefer to exchange role, and that give you the idea, the linguistic idea of the gender talk that take place in the society. Now, how this gender talk, this whole idea of the gender talk, is used by the creative women writers again to deconstruct certain ideas, certain phallocentric ideas which appear problematic to us. So this deconstructive move again can be seen in another poem by Nikita Gill, In All Girls. That is a poem title. In this poem, she writes, if all girls were taught how to love each other fiercely instead of how to compete with each other and hate their own bodies, what a different and beautiful world we would live in. So when we pay attention to the language here and the way it is structured, the whole poem is put into the frame, we really find it amazing, because the poem begins with if. If is a functional morpheme. So the poem begins with if, that instantly evokes a speculation. So the poet is actually not talking about something which is existent, which is present. She's talking about something which is speculative. So she speculates, and her speculation immediately inverts that cooperative socialization, as it is said that the women actually cooperate with each other. So this whole sense of the cooperation into competition, because this is speculation. So she says that this gendered socialization lead to the gendered way of thinking and gendered way of talking. So if you take this example of in-group talk among the girls, do you find that they always cooperate with each other? I mean, of course they cooperate. We are not negating it. But the thing is, when the women start thinking themselves or defining themselves in relation to the man, they become competitor of each other. That cooperation is replaced by the competition, And then if, to make the matter worse, if they believe in the stereotypical image of the women which is supplied by the phallocentric discourse, they actually start thinking about their body as something sinful. So that's why the poet says that if all girls were taught how to love each other fiercely instead of how to compete with each other and hate their bodies, then what a different and beautiful world we would live in. So, at the same time, she is rejecting that the status of the woman as a mere body that is subject to the masculine gaze. And she also rejects this association of the sinfulness and shame with the women body, which is generally done by in the phallocentric discourse. So this way, this feminist deconstructive move leads to the production of new meaning and to look at the things, from a very different perspective, and that is very helpful in strengthen the gender discourse, and that actually becomes the need of the time. Well, it's almost 3 o'clock, so I think I should conclude my presentation. So I would like to finish my talk with the quote by Susan Harding. Susan Harding says that speech is a means for dealing with social and psychological situations. When man and women have different experiences and operate in different social contexts, they tend to develop different genres of speech and different skills for doing things with the word. So language of the feminine has a huge potential. Why? Because it is capable to do new and different things with the words, which is not done by others earlier, because the feminine associated with the otherness, and this otherness is less explored in comparison to the self, the masculine, which has been there at the center. So this language of the feminine subvert the wrongful representation and lopsided ideas of the phallocentric discourse. It builds the counter discourse which will present the alternative worldview. It also corrects the perception and the cognitive categorization for a more wholesome and balanced knowledge. So that way, this language of the feminine is full of potential, and women writers have started using it, and there is a lot of further scope to use that. So I would just conclude my presentation. I think I can come to the last slide. Thank you so much for your patient listening. I'll come back to the main screen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhumika Sharma, and it was really a very informative session. I hope that everyone has enjoyed already.
So it's my pleasure.
Yeah, and there is a question from Dr. Neha Arora, and her question is, now that many Black and Dalit women are raising voice against the white elite, upper class, and caste feminism, and not just patriarchy, do we assume that there are some writings by such subaltern women who are deconstructing not just patriarchal but also elite feminist language, when in socio-cultural sphere they deny sisterhood? Do we see such examples in their literature too?
Yes, Dr. Neha, I agree with Neha's point of view, because see, what I referred to in my presentation, that is the otherness. And otherness, if we try to understand this idea of otherness, that you can understand something when you yourself come into that position. So there has been, especially in this third wave of the feminism, we see that there is multiplicities, and that's why we just don't talk about the feminism. We talk about feminisms. This is the plural. Again, a deconstruction at the site of the language. So feminisms become important. That is actually the present phase of the feminism, that does not remain just focused on one category or one group, because it needs to be more accommodative, and that has been the problematic of the phallocentric discourse, because that was not accommodative of the women's perspective. Now the women have already made their mark in the literature and in the the larger culture discourse. These cross categorization, or let's say juxtaposition of the various categories which lead to the formation of identity, maybe Dalit women or Black women, they also have a huge potential to resort to this deconstructive move. And if they find the feminist elite and their construction problematic, they can also use their perspective, their worldview, because of course their way of looking at the things is different. You cannot equate it, let's say, the white middle class woman who's speaking from American academia. So but they have their perspective, and that is again something which is to be there in the discourse. We cannot completely push it out, because we would be doing the same thing otherwise. So this way we need to be more accommodative, and that would happen when we include all the perspectives, all the worldviews, and let everyone share one's experience. So yes, Neha, of course there is a huge potential in the otherness. All the time it was self which was foregrounded. Now I would say it is the otherness it is to be foregrounded, and because this otherness is less explored. So yes, definitely, there is a huge scope of using that otherness, that the power of otherness, and these women writers who actually experience this juxtaposition of various categories in terms of class, color, and maybe other kind of categories. They have lot of potential, and they have shown it. In their writing, you can see that whether it is Bama or maybe some other writer, they have actually spoken very fiercely against the class, and even certain groups of the women who marginalize it. Black feminism, for matter, has been a very strong discourse that challenges white feminism. So yes, of course, I agree with Neha's point of view.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. And also, Pathan Mehrun Nisa, she asked another question. When you mentioned about the other, are you not referring to Abdul Jan Muhammad binary oppositions?
If you recall the very opening of my presentation, when I refer to the Toril Moy, when we talk about the binary opposition, what she said, that it is full of promises, but at the same time, it is very risky. The masculine and feminine that come, in contrast to each other. So Abdul Jan Muhammad's binary opposition, yes, of course, when we are talking about the two contrasting things, or two categories, or two different worldview, they are bound to differ from each other. So we would be referring to the binary opposition. We cannot do away with that. But my submission is, or my postulation is, that we need not to compartmentalize these two. We need to make them interact. We need to make them interface each other, and that's why it is to be done very cautiously. So that's why I would say that if we develop this language of the feminine, it is full of promise, but at the same time it is dicey and risky. If you again resort to that power equation, again you try to boss the other worldview, the other point of view, and do not do justice and do not remain objective in terms of really genuine in understanding the other point of view, you cannot stand your position, because then you will be displaced by someone other. So that way there is definitely the binary opposition that remain there to understand the contrast, because there is differences. When we are talking about differences, how can we do away with the contrast altogether? There are differences we need to acknowledge, but these differences do not mean that one is superior to the other. So this hierarchical pattern is to be replaced by that networking, where we have the equal footing and where all the perspective can come across and talk to each other. So that is my position. Thank you, Marinisa, for your wonderful question.
Thank you, ma'am. Actually, that was so insightful. I think everyone enjoyed already, and I shouldn't repeat it. And we are really happy, and we are so honored that having you here. And
Okay,
thank
thank
you
you.
so much, and thank you for your wonderful session. Thank you others for listening to her session speech, and also we would love to have you for another time. And I hope that we will get you here again. So
Yeah.
thank you